Emma's reflection in the mirror stared back at her, the ivory silk of her dress cascading like liquid light across the floor. She adjusted the veil with trembling fingers, the diamonds at her ears catching the glow of the chandelier above. Around her, bridesmaids laughed softly, sipping champagne as they fussed with bouquets and lipstick. Everything about the room whispered perfection, the kind of dream wedding little girls imagined and wealthy families could afford. Yet beneath Emma's painted smile, there was a flicker of unease, one she quickly masked by joining in the chatter. "Guess who I invited?" she said suddenly, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial tone. Her bridesmaids leaned closer, curious. "My dad." She let the words hang in the air, her lips curling into a mischievous smirk. The girls burst into giggles. They knew her father's story, or at least the parts Emma had chosen to share. Jack, the veteran who came home with scars, some visible, some hidden. Jack, the man who worked late nights fixing cars just to pay rent, who showed up to PTA meetings in worn-out boots while other dads arrived in suits. Jack, who raised Emma alone after her mother's passing but never climbed the ladder of wealth. To Emma's circle, he was an outlier in a world of polished ambition. "Wait, you seriously invited him?" one bridesmaid whispered, eyes wide with amusement. "Here, to this." She gestured toward the glittering ballroom visible beyond the door, where crystal chandeliers dripped with light and tables glistened under golden cutlery. Emma shrugged, sipping her champagne, though her smirk wavered. "Yeah, I mean, he won't come. He's not the type." But it felt funny, you know. Like a gesture. "Imagine him walking in here. He'd stick out like. She didn't finish. The room filled with muffled laughter, and the bridesmaids exchanged knowing glances. But behind her laugh, Emma remembered nights when her father hadn't eaten so she could. She remembered him sitting by her bed during fevers, his rough hand cool against her forehead, whispering that everything would be okay. She remembered Christmas mornings when he crafted gifts from scraps, his tired eyes shining brighter than any wrapping paper. Jack had been her rock. But as she grew older, as her life branched into circles of privilege, the distance between them grew. She loved him, but she also felt embarrassed. How could she explain him to a world of wealth and spotless perfection? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The wedding planner poked her head inside, clipboard in hand. 10 minutes, darling, she chirped. The bridesmaids squealed and gathered around Emma, fluffing her dress, spraying perfume into the air. Emma forced another smile. She glanced at her phone on the vanity. No message from him. No surprise there. A small part of her, deep down, had wanted him to come. Wanted him to look at her in this gown and see how far she'd come. But another part feared exactly that, feared the clash of worlds, the judgmental stares, the whispers about the veteran father who didn't belong. She thought back to the invitation she had mailed, hastily scribbled on a card. She hadn't even expected him to open it. She remembered writing it more like a dare than a hope, a way to prove something to herself. He won't show. He knows better. The bridesmaids snapped selfies, posting to social media with captions about fairy tales and perfect love. Emma's fiancé's family, wealthy and well-connected, mingled outside, their laughter ringing like bells. Everything about this day screamed triumph, success, and carefully curated happiness. And yet, in the quiet corners of Emma's heart, there was an ache she couldn't ignore. She sat down for a moment, smoothing her gown across her knees. Her reflection looked flawless, but it felt hollow. He wouldn't fit in here anyway, she whispered to herself, though no one asked. One bridesmaid overheard and nodded quickly, of course not. This isn't his kind of thing. Emma smiled faintly. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to convince herself that she hadn't just shut a door on the man who gave up everything for her. She wanted to silence the guilt that twisted in her stomach. But guilt has a way of living in the shadows, and it tugged at her relentlessly. Somewhere outside, music drifted through the ballroom doors. The wedding planner returned, this time clapping her hands. Positions, everyone, it's time. The bridesmaids squealed again, their laughter filling the room as they filed out in glittering dresses. Emma stood slowly, her veil trailing behind her, her hands shaking as she picked up her bouquet. For a moment, she lingered by the mirror again. In her reflection, she saw the girl she had once been, barefoot in the backyard, her father teaching her how to fly a kite. She saw herself running into his arms after school, her head pressed against his uniform, the faint smell of oil and dust clinging to him. She saw the man who had never left her, even when the world seemed too heavy to bear. Her throat tightened. She turned away quickly, afraid of ruining her makeup. "He's not coming," she muttered under her breath, as if speaking it aloud could seal it as truth. And then she straightened her shoulders, pasted on the smile everyone expected, and walked toward the ballroom doors. Inside, the chandeliers sparkled brighter than ever, the guests rose in anticipation, and the orchestra swelled with music. Everything was in place. Everything was perfect. And yet, as she stepped into the aisle, Emma's heart whispered a question she could not silence: what if he does come? The grand doors of the ballroom creaked open, the kind of sound that usually went unnoticed beneath music and chatter, but this time it silenced the room. Heads turned in unison, voices died mid-sentence, and for a moment the only sound was the faint rustle of silk gowns and the echo of footsteps against polished marble. Emma, already halfway down the aisle, froze. Her bouquet trembled in her hands as her eyes darted to the entrance. There he was, Jack, her father. But he was not the man she had pictured, scruffy, weary, awkwardly out of place among the chandeliers and crystal glasses. No, this was a different Jack. He stood tall in a dark tailored suit, his shoulders broad and sure, his silver hair neatly combed, his presence commanding not by wealth but by something deeper, something unshakable. Beside him, 4 children clung to his hands and coat, their faces bright and full of wonder. And just behind them, a sharply dressed man with an aura of quiet power followed, drawing whispers from those who recognized him, the CEO of a major company, one whose name appeared often on Forbes lists. The hall erupted in a ripple of confusion. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering furiously, their curiosity barely contained. Emma's fiancé stiffened at the altar, his parents exchanging bewildered glances. None of this made sense. Jack walked forward slowly, the children at his side, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Emma. He smiled, not the nervous, apologetic smile she remembered, but a calm, steady one that reached his eyes. Emma felt her throat tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to come. And if he did, he wasn't supposed to look like this, confident, grounded, radiant in a way that eclipsed even the chandeliers. The CEO shook Jack's hand firmly as they reached the middle of the aisle, then turned to the crowd. "This man," he said, his voice carrying easily, "is one of the greatest men I've ever met." His words sliced through the murmurs, leaving the hall in stunned silence. Emma's knees felt weak. She remembered mocking the very idea of her father here, convinced he would embarrass her. But now, the tables had turned. She was the one who felt small under the weight of her own assumptions. One of the children tugged at Jack's sleeve and whispered something. Jack bent down, listening patiently, then nodded with that same gentle warmth Emma knew so well. He introduced them softly. Children he had taken in from foster care, kids who had lost their way until he gave them his. He wasn't just their guardian, he was their anchor, their father in every way that mattered. Gasps and soft murmurs spread through the hall as realization settled. The CEO added, "I met Jack when he was mentoring veterans who'd lost everything. He wasn't looking for recognition, but the way he carried others when he had so little himself, it humbled me. He reminded me what leadership truly means. That's why I've supported every project he's touched since then. His work is building futures, not just for these children, but for hundreds like them." Emma's eyes blurred with tears. She remembered the man who patched her scraped knees, who stayed up teaching her multiplication at the kitchen table, who sacrificed meals just to make sure she had enough. She had thought he was invisible to the world. But now she saw that his quiet sacrifices had rippled far beyond her understanding. The guests, once skeptical, now sat in awed silence. Some wiped their eyes discreetly. Emma's fiancé shifted uncomfortably, his polished composure cracking under the weight of the moment. But Emma hardly noticed. Her gaze never left her father. Her bouquet slipped from her hands as she rushed down the aisle, the world blurring around her. The veil trailed behind her like a wing of light, but she didn't care about grace or appearances anymore. She only cared about him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached him. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. His familiar scent, faint cologne over something earthy, steady, real, washed over her. I was wrong. So wrong. You're the only person I needed to see today. Jack's hand cradled the back of her head, just as he had when she was a child. He didn't need to say much. His presence, his steady embrace, was enough. Around them, silence reigned, followed by something unexpected, applause. It began with a single clap, hesitant but sincere, then grew louder as more guests joined in. Soon the hall was filled with thunderous applause, not for the bride or the groom, not for the gold-trimmed spectacle of wealth, but for a man who had lived a life of quiet integrity and kindness. Emma pulled back, her face wet with tears, her mascara smudged, her carefully crafted image undone. But for the first time that day, she felt free. Her father stood before her, not just as the man who raised her, but as a symbol of everything real and good. And she knew then that no amount of chandeliers or fine china could compare to the light of a man's heart when it burned with selflessness. The CEO placed a hand on Jack's shoulder again, nodding respectfully. "This is the kind of man the world needs to see," he said. "And today, we're lucky to witness it." Emma turned to the crowd, her voice shaking but clear. "This is my father, the bravest, kindest man I've ever known. And today, more than ever, I'm proud to be his daughter." Her words echoed through the ballroom, shattering whatever judgments had lingered in the corners of polished minds. People rose to their feet, standing not out of obligation but out of reverence. The orchestra, almost instinctively, shifted into softer notes, filling the air with something tender, almost sacred. Emma held her father's hand tightly, the children nestled around them, and for the first time she understood, this day wasn't about wealth or appearances. It was about love, sacrifice, and the invisible threads that wove lives together. And as she looked at her father, standing tall and unshaken, Emma realized she hadn't invited him as a joke. Deep down, she had always wanted him there. She had always needed him there. And now, he had arrived, not to fit into her world, but to show her what truly mattered in life.